The year was 1910 and snow fell soft as feathers over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Inside a cabin warmed by crackling pine, an old man sat in his favorite chair, gnarled hands folded over a wool blanket. Ezekiel Frost was 81 years old. His beard hung white as winter clouds, but his eyes still held the sharpness of a man who had seen too much and forgotten too little. Across from him sat his grandson, 20 years old, with the restless energy of youth burning in his chest. The boy had asked 3 times that winter, and tonight, finally, his grandfather decided to tell the truth. "Tell me about grandmother," the boy said, leaning forward. "Tell me how you met her." Ezekiel stared into the fire, watching flames twist and dance like spirits made visible. When he spoke, his voice came rough as stones tumbling down a mountainside. "The first time I saw your grandmother, she was hanging upside down from a wooden pole in the middle of the New Mexico desert. Blood dripped from her wrists onto the sand. The sun was so hot, you could see the very air shimmer and bend, and she was begging me, boy, begging me to take her, to use her body, to plant my seed in her every night if that's what I wanted. All of it, just to save her sisters." The boy's eyes went wide as silver dollars. "That was the day," Ezekiel continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, "that I learned what true mercy means and what it kiss." The old man closed his eyes. The years fell away like autumn leaves stripped by wind. When he opened them again, he was no longer 81. He was 49, and it was September of 1878, and he was completely alone on a mountain, checking his trap lines. Ezekiel Frost moved through the forest the way smoke moves through trees, silent and inevitable. 49 years old, but his body still carried the memory of survival learned over more than a decade of brutal mountain winters. His beard hung thick and wild, more gray than brown now, reaching halfway down his chest. His hair, long and tied back with a strip of leather, showed streaks of silver at the temples. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jawline, a souvenir from Gettysburg that had never quite healed right. It pulled at his face when he smiled, which was rare enough that most people had never seen it. He knelt beside a steel jaw trap, noting the rabbit caught there since yesterday morning. Dead now. The meat would be questionable at best. He reset the trap anyway, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this 10,000 times before. This was trap number 7 of 15 scattered across these mountains like a constellation only he could read. The Newhouse number 3, finest steel trap made in America. He had bought them in 1867 with the last of his army pay, right after Margaret and Emma died, when he decided to become a ghost. 12 years alone. 12 years since he had slept in a bed with another human being. 12 years since he had heard his name spoken with anything resembling affection instead of the cold transaction of commerce. He stood slowly, bones protesting the movement, and adjusted the Winchester rifle slung across his shoulder. The Model 1873, chambered in .44-40, a weapon so reliable it had saved his life more times than he could count. 47 rounds left in his ammunition pouch. He counted bullets the way other men counted blessings, each one a small promise against the chaos that had once consumed everything he loved. The morning stretched before him, cool and crystalline. September in the Sangre de Cristo range meant the aspens were starting their slow transformation to gold, and the elk would be moving to lower elevation soon. Good hunting weather coming. He had venison hanging in his smokehouse, potatoes packed in straw in his root cellar, enough dried beans and cornmeal to last until spring if he was careful. Everything a man needed to exist, not to live, just to exist. There was a difference, though sometimes he forgot what it was. He was checking trap number 9, his mind empty of everything except the mechanical routine of survival when he heard it. A sound so faint that most men would have missed it entirely, would have dismissed it as wind or the cry of a distant hawk. But Ezekiel had not spoken to another human being in 3 months, and his ears had grown sharp in the silence. They had learned to catch every whisper the forest offered. It was a scream, distant, perhaps 3 miles south, coming from the direction of Red Rock Valley, where the sandstone formations rose like ancient cathedrals from the desert floor. His first instinct, honed by 12 years of solitude, was to turn away. Not my business, not anymore. The world could burn, and he would watch from his mountain and feel nothing. But the scream came again, and this time he could identify it as a woman's voice. High and desperate, and ending in a wet cough that spoke of dehydration and pain and the kind of suffering that carved itself into a person's bones. Margaret's voice echoed in his memory without permission. "Help me, Ezekiel, please. I need you. Help me." But he had been gone, out hunting 3 days deep in the high country, and when he returned with a deer across his saddle, she and Emma were already cold in their beds, victims of the scarlet fever that had torn through the territory that summer, like a demon with red hands. No one had helped them. No one had even known they needed help. That was the price of living so far from civilization. You could die and the world would never notice. Your absence would leave no mark at all. He stood frozen between past and present for 10 heartbeats, his hand tight on the Winchester. Then he turned south and began to walk, his pace steady and relentless as the turning of seasons. 3 miles through pine forest that gave way to juniper and scrub brush as the elevation dropped. Down from the high country where he lived, like a hermit king of nothing, into the red rock formations that gave the valley its name. The sun climbed higher with each step, and the temperature rose from cool to warm to the kind of brutal heat that made men stupid and desperate. By the time he reached the valley floor, sweat soaked through his buckskin shirt, and his mouth tasted of copper and dust. And then he saw them, and his heart, which he thought had turned to stone 12 years ago, cracked wide open. 5 wooden poles, each one 12 feet tall, driven deep into the rocky ground with the kind of deliberate effort that spoke of planning and purpose. 5 women hanging upside down, their ankles bound with thick manila rope to the tops of the poles. They wore the traditional dress of Apache women, buckskin decorated with intricate beadwork that must have taken months to complete. But their beautiful clothing could not hide what had been done to them. Blood dripped from their wrists where the rope had rubbed skin raw, creating slow rivers that ran down their forearms and fell drop by drop into the dust. Their faces were purple from hanging inverted too long, blood pooling in their heads with nowhere to go. The New Mexico sun beat down without mercy, and Ezekiel could see blisters forming on exposed skin, could see the way their lips had cracked and bled, could see death approaching with patient certainty. He approached slowly, rifle ready, his eyes scanning the horizon for whoever had committed this particular brand of cruelty. But the valley was empty. Tracks everywhere, boot prints and horse droppings scattered like evidence of a trial already concluded. Maybe 2 days old, the edges of the prints already softened by wind. Whoever had strung these women up like animals had left them to die slow and alone under a sun that cared nothing for suffering. The youngest, a girl who could not have been more than 16, hung completely limp. Unconscious or already dead, he could not tell from this distance. But the oldest, the woman hanging from the center pole, was still moving. She was using every ounce of strength left in her body to lift herself up with her core muscles, trying to take pressure off her ankles, trying desperately to let the blood drain from her head even for a moment. It was an act of pure will, and Ezekiel recognized it immediately as the determination of someone who refused to die quietly. As he came closer, she saw him. Her eyes locked onto his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. They were amber-colored, those eyes, unusual for Apache, like looking into captured sunlight, and they were filled with something beyond desperation. They were filled with the terrible clarity that comes when you have already decided what you are willing to sacrifice. He stopped 20 feet away, close enough now to see all the details he wished he could unsee. The logo stamped into the rope, Hargrove Land and Mining Company, a wooden sign nailed to the center pole, the letters burned into the wood with cruel precision. Savages will hang until the crows pick them clean. Silas Hargrove. Of course. The name tasted like poison in his mind. The woman at the center pole tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Only a rasp emerged, barely human. Ezekiel unslung his canteen, approached carefully as if approaching a wounded animal, and held it to her cracked lips. She drank greedily, water spilling down her already inverted face, running into her hair, dripping onto the sand below. When she could finally speak, her voice came rough as sandpaper scraped across stone. But the words were clear and terrible and brave, beyond anything he had ever heard. "White man," she said in broken English that spoke of education interrupted by violence. "If you have mercy in your heart, any mercy at all, I will forsake everything. I will be your woman, your wife, your slave if that is what you want. I will warm your bed and bear your children and ask nothing in return. You can use my body every night, every way you desire. I do not care anymore. Just please, I beg you by whatever God you worship, cut my sisters down first. Let them live. Do with me whatever you will, but let them live. They are innocent. They have done nothing. Please, Ezekiel looked into those amber eyes and saw no deception. She meant every word. This woman, this warrior woman, who had clearly lived a life of strength and pride, was offering to sell herself into slavery, offering her body and her future and everything she was, just to save 4 other people. Something in his chest broke open, a door he had sealed shut 12 years ago, with nails and grief and the bitter certainty that caring about anyone ever again was a luxury he could not afford. He set down the canteen, drew his Bowie knife, the 10-inch blade that had saved his life at Shiloh, and without saying a single word, without acknowledging her offer or refusing it, he walked to the youngest girl hanging limp and unconscious. He cut the rope at her ankles and caught her as she fell. She weighed almost nothing, just skin and bones and dehydration. Her breathing was shallow, her skin burning with fever. Heat stroke severe. She needed shade and water and cooling down immediately or she would be dead within the hour. He laid her gently in the shade cast by her own pole, positioning her on her side in case she vomited, then moved without hesitation to the next. One by one he cut them down. The second youngest, maybe 19 years old, who whimpered as circulation returned to her legs with the agony of 1,000 needles. The third, closer to 21, who sat with her head between her knees and focused on breathing. On just breathing, on the simple miracle of being horizontal again. The fourth, around 23, who immediately crawled on hands and knees to the youngest and began checking her pulse with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood medicine. The woman who had spoken was last. When he cut her rope, she fell, and he caught her instinctively. For a moment, they were face to face, her body in his arms, and he saw surprise flash across her features. Surprise and something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, though they had never met. Noli me tangere, she whispered in Latin. Do not touch me. He set her down as gently as he had set down the others, and she looked up at him with those extraordinary eyes now filled with confusion. I am not your enemy, sister, he said in English and walked back to his canteen. She stared at him, trying to understand what was happening, why this stranger had saved them without demanding payment, without even acknowledging her desperate offer. Why did you save the youngest first? Why not me? I made the offer. I am the one who belongs to you now. Because she was dying fastest, he said simply. You were strong enough to wait. The woman blinked, and something like respect flickered across her sunburned face. She opened her mouth to speak again, then closed it. Opened it, closed it. Finally managed, you speak Latin. I had a wife who was educated, he said, his voice flat as hammered iron. She taught me many things before she died. Neither spoke, broken only by the ragged breathing of 5 women who were learning how to be alive again. Ezekiel knelt beside the youngest, checking her pupils, dilated, fever raging. She needed intervention now, or she would slip away like smoke through fingers. He looked at the woman who had crawled to help, the one who seemed to know medicine. You understand healing? She nodded, her own breathing still labored. I was trained before all of this. Good, he said, handing her the canteen. Get water into her, slowly. Too fast and she will reject it. I need to get all of you to shelter. Where? The woman who had offered herself asked, her voice stronger now. We are miles from anywhere. My people are scattered. The mission is burned. My cabin, 9 miles north through rough country. But I only have 1 horse, and she cannot carry all of you at once. The woman pushed herself to sitting, wincing as blood flow returned to her extremities with cruel insistence. Then you will have to make 3 trips. We can wait. We have waited this long. You may not have time, Ezekiel said, scanning the horizon again. If Hargrove's men come back and find you gone, they will look for tracks. They will find my cabin eventually. The woman met his eyes without flinching. Then we pray they do not come back soon. But we trust you, stranger. We have no other choice, and you have already proven yourself different from other white men. What is your name? Ezekiel Frost, he said after a pause. That is my name. I am Kiona, she said, and these are my sisters, Tyan, Halona, Adsila, and Nyabi. We are the daughters of Chief Kucheta of the Chiricahua Apache, and we are in your debt. Ezekiel looked at Nyabi, the youngest, who still had not regained consciousness. We need to move, now. Debts can wait until people are alive to owe them. He stood and walked to where his horse, Ash, was tethered in the meager shade of a twisted juniper 200 yards away. The Appaloosa was 10 years old, steady and strong, and had carried him through 1,000 lonely days without complaint. Ash could manage 400 pounds, including saddle and supplies, if the load was distributed properly. 2 women at a time, assuming they were not too heavy. He would have to make the calculation carefully. He brought the horse back and studied the situation with the tactical mind that had kept him alive through 3 years of war. Niabi first, obviously. She was critical, but she was also the lightest, maybe 90 pounds soaking wet. He could pair her with one other. Adsila looked to be about 110. That would work. He wrapped Niabi carefully in his bedroll, tying her behind the saddle with practiced knots that would hold her secure even if Ash had to run. Then he helped Adsila onto the horse, and she settled in front of the saddle horn, her hands gripping the pommel with white-knuckled intensity. "I will be back for the other 3, he told Kiona and the 2 remaining sisters. "Stay in the shade. Drink the rest of this water." He handed Kiona a second canteen he kept in his saddlebags. "If you see riders approaching, hide in those rocks." He pointed to an outcropping 50 yards to the east, a tumble of red sandstone that would provide cover. "Do not try to fight. Just hide and be silent." Kiona took the canteen with both hands, and he noticed they were trembling slightly. Whether from exhaustion or emotion, he could not tell. "Thank you," she said. "We will be here. We will wait." Ezekiel mounted behind Adsila, feeling the horse adjust to the extra weight, and turned north toward home. The girl in front of him sat rigid, clearly terrified of being so close to a white man, of being dependent on his mercy. He understood. He had seen what white men did when they thought no one was watching. The ride north was quiet except for the sound of hooves on stone and the labored breathing of Niabi behind him. Ezekiel kept his attention split between the trail ahead and the horizon behind, watching for dust plumes that might indicate riders. But the land remained still. After 20 minutes, Adsila finally spoke. Her English was better than Kiona's, more fluid, and he wondered where she had learned it. "You speak some of our tongue?" she asked quietly. "No," he admitted, "only English. And a little Spanish I picked up during the war." "Why did you save us?" "White men never help Apache. They hate us. They kill us. They take everything and give nothing." Ezekiel was silent for a long moment, considering how much truth to offer. Finally, he said, 12 years ago, my wife and daughter died of fever. I was away hunting. When I came back, they were already gone. No one had helped them. No one even knew they were sick. I was not there when they needed me most." He paused, his throat tight. "I cannot save them, but I can save you. Maybe that is enough. Maybe it has to be." "Your wife," Adsila said carefully. "She was white? Yes. But you help Apache anyway?" "The color of skin does not matter when someone is dying," Ezekiel said. "Death is death, suffering is suffering, and turning away from it makes us less than human." They rode in silence after that, and Ezekiel focused on the trail, on getting these broken women to safety before the sun climbed higher and took even more from them. It took 90 minutes to reach his cabin, following a path that only he knew, winding through arroyos and over ridges that would be invisible to anyone else. When they finally arrived, he helped Adsila down and carried Niabi inside, laying her on his bed, the only bed in the single-room cabin. "Stay here," he told Adsila. "Get her cooled down. There is a well outside. Cold water, use it. I will be back with your sisters as quickly as I can." He mounted Ash again and turned south, retracing his path. The second trip and took the same 90 minutes, and when he arrived back at the valley, Kiona and the others were still there, still waiting. He collected Halona and Tyan this time, the 2 middle sisters. Halona was clearly traumatized, flinching at his every movement, and he moved as slowly and carefully as possible, speaking in low tones, trying not to frighten her further. Tyan, on the other hand, was different, harder. Her eyes held a kind of cold fury that he recognized from the war. She had lost someone recently, someone important. On the ride back, it was Tyan who spoke. "Hargrove killed our father," she said bluntly. "And my beloved, Chaska. He was a warrior. They shot him in the back while he was trying to protect us." "I know Hargrove," Ezekiel said, his voice tight. 5 years ago, he tried to steal land from Mexican families near Santa Fe. I stopped him. He does not forget insults. So he will come for you too," Tyan said. "You have made yourself a target by saving us." "Probably," Ezekiel agreed. "Then why? Why risk everything for strangers?" "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply, "and I am tired of doing nothing while the world burns." When they reached the cabin, Halona and Tyan stumbled inside and collapsed near the fire. Ezekiel did not pause. He mounted Ash for the third time that day and headed south again, toward Kiona, who had been alone now for 3 hours. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. When he arrived, Kiona was standing, though it clearly cost her. She had found a sharp rock and cut herself free from where she had retied the rope loosely around her ankles as a precaution. In her hand, she held a small knife made of flint. Primitive but effective. She was ready to fight or die trying. When she heard his approach, she spun, knife raised, then lowered it when she recognized him and Ash. "You came back," she said, and her voice carried a note of wonder. "I thought perhaps you would not. I thought perhaps you would take my sisters and leave me here as punishment for my pride." "I gave my word," Ezekiel said, dismounting. "I do not break my word." She tried to walk to the horse and her legs gave out. He caught her before she hit the ground, and for a moment they were very close, closer than propriety allowed. He could feel her heart beating fast against his chest, could feel how thin she had become, how much suffering had been carved from her flesh. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you different?" "I am not different," he said. "I am just human. Just human and tired and trying to do one good thing before I die." He helped her onto Ash and mounted behind her, and they rode north together through the gathering darkness. She leaned back against him slightly, and he could feel her trembling. Whether from cold or exhaustion or relief, he did not know. Maybe all three. When they finally reached the cabin, it was full dark. Inside, her 4 sisters waited by the fire. When Kiona entered, they rushed to her, all of them embracing and crying and speaking rapidly in Apache. Ezekiel stood in the doorway watching, feeling like an intruder in his own home. Finally, Kiona extracted herself from her sisters and turned to him. She walked slowly across the room and stood before him, her amber eyes searching his face. "You saved us all," she said. "You asked for nothing. You demanded nothing. You did not claim the payment I offered." "Why?" "Because you should never have had to offer it," he said quietly. "No one should ever be so desperate that they trade their body for mercy." She reached out and placed her hand over his heart, and he froze, not knowing what this gesture meant in her culture. "You are a good man, Ezekiel Frost," she said. "The world needs more good men. Thank you. Thank you for seeing us as human. Thank you for not looking away." He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat, and gently moved her hand away. "Sleep," he said, "all of you. You are safe here tonight. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next." He turned to leave, to sleep in the barn as he had planned, but Kiona's voice stopped him. "Where will you sleep?" "The barn, with my horse. You need privacy and rest." "This is your home," she protested. "And tonight you need it more than I do," he said firmly. "Sleep, Kiona. We have much to discuss in the morning, but tonight, just sleep." He walked out into the cold night air and closed the door behind him. In the barn, Ash nickered softly, and he spent the next hour brushing the horse down, checking the animal's legs and hooves, making sure his faithful companion had not been injured by the long day. Only when Ash was settled did Ezekiel finally allow himself to sit, to lean against the rough wooden wall, to let the exhaustion wash over him. He pulled out his Winchester and began the ritual of cleaning it, working through the familiar steps automatically. Check the chamber, clean the barrel, oil the mechanism, count the bullets. Still 47 rounds. Not enough if Hargrove came with his full force. Not nearly enough. His mind drifted to 5 years earlier, to the day he had made an enemy of Silas Hargrove. He had been in Santa Fe buying supplies, a rare trip to civilization that he took maybe twice a year. He had been walking past an alley when he heard shouting, and his body had moved before his mind could catch up. 3 of Hargrove's men beating an old Mexican man whose only crime was refusing to leave land his family had owned for 3 generations. Ezekiel had intervened without thinking, dropping 2 of the men with his fists and sending the 3rd running. He had helped the old man to safety and thought nothing more about it until Hargrove himself had appeared, riding a black horse and wearing a suit fine enough for a senator. The man had looked at Ezekiel with cold calculation and said, "You have made a mistake, mountain man. I do not forget insults, and I always collect what is owed to me." Ezekiel had walked away that day thinking the threat was empty posturing, but he should have known better. Men like Hargrove did not make empty threats. They made promises. He looked toward the cabin, seeing the warm glow of firelight through the window. 5 women inside, 5 lives now tangled with his, 5 reasons for Hargrove to come with fire and fury. Tomorrow he would ride to Santa Fe and send a telegram to Thomas Brennan, his old friend from the war, the only man in the territorial government he still trusted. Brennan commanded cavalry out of Fort Union. If anyone could help, it would be him. But tonight, Ezekiel sat in the darkness and cleaned his guns and wondered if he had just saved 5 lives or merely postponed 5 deaths. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant and uncaring. And somewhere far to the south, in a mansion built on stolen land and broken promises, Silas Hargrove was learning that 5 Apache women had escaped. And Ezekiel knew, with the certainty that comes from years of surviving, that this was only the beginning. The storm was coming. The only question was whether any of them would survive it. Inside the cabin, Kiona lay awake long after her sisters had fallen asleep. She stared at the rough wooden beams of the ceiling and tried to understand what had happened. A white man had saved them, had asked for nothing, had given everything. It violated every lesson she had learned about the world, every bitter truth carved into her soul by years of watching her people suffer. She touched her wrists where the rope had burned her skin, feeling the pain that would heal in time. But deeper than the physical wounds was something else, a feeling she could not name. Gratitude, yes. Relief, certainly. But beneath those expected emotions was something more complicated, something that felt almost like hope. And hope, she had learned, was the most dangerous thing of all. Outside in the darkness, neither Kiona nor Ezekiel knew they were being watched. 2 miles away, hidden in the rocks, a man named Billy crouched with a spyglass pressed to his eye. He had been tracking the 5 Apache women for Hargrove, had watched them hang, had been ordered to make sure they died slowly. And now he watched them disappear into a cabin with a mountain man who should have minded his own business. Billy smiled in the darkness. This was information Colonel Hargrove would pay well for. Very well indeed. He turned his horse and rode south through the night, carrying a news that would change everything. And behind him, in a cabin lit by dying firelight, 6 people slept, unaware that their brief moment of peace was already over before it had truly begun. The mountain did not care. The stars did not care. And morning, when it came, would bring choices that none of them were ready to make. Dawn came slowly to the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose gold and crimson that seemed too beautiful for a world containing so much cruelty. Ezekiel Frost woke in the barn as he had every morning since Margaret died. At the first pale hint of light, his body rising before his mind fully engaged. For one blessed moment, he forgot about the 5 Apache women sleeping 30 feet away in his cabin. Forgot about Silas Hargrove and the violence surely coming. Forgot about everything except the simple animal pleasure of breathing cold mountain air and feeling his heart beat steady in his chest. Then memory returned like a fist driven into his gut, and he was on his feet, reaching automatically for the Winchester leaning against the rough wooden wall. He checked the rifle with practiced efficiency. Chamber clear, barrel clean, 8 rounds loaded. The ritual that had kept him alive through 3 years of war and 12 years of solitude. The small acts of preparation that stood between breathing and not breathing. He stepped outside into air so cold it burned his lungs and looked toward the cabin. Smoke rose thin and gray from the stone chimney. Someone was awake. He approached quietly, boots making almost no sound on the frost-hardened ground, and knocked twice on the doorframe before entering. He had learned in the war that walking unannounced into spaces where frightened people held weapons was an excellent way to get shot by accident. Inside, Kiona stood by the fire, tending a pot that hung from the iron hook over the flames. She turned at his entrance, and for the first time, Ezekiel saw her clearly in proper light. She had washed her face and tied back her long black hair with a strip of leather. The purple bruising from hanging upside down had faded to yellow-green, and the cuts on her wrist were already beginning to scab over. She was beautiful in the way that mountains are beautiful, all strength and sharp edges and something ancient that refused to bend or break. "Good morning," she said in careful English, each word formed with concentration. "I make food. Not much. I find cornmeal in your box. I make what my mother teach me when I am small." "You did not have to do that," Ezekiel said, genuine surprise in his voice. "You should be resting, recovering." "I rest by working," Kiona replied simply, stirring the pot. "Sitting makes me think too much. Thinking brings bad memories. Working keeps them away." She paused, then added, "My sisters still sleep, except Naiabi. She wake for short time, drink water, eat little bit, sleep again. Her fever is less now. I think she will live." "That is very good news," Ezekiel said, relief flooding through him like warm water. "Heat stroke can kill even days after you think the danger has passed." The body can just give up. He moved to the fire, careful to keep a respectful distance. I need to ride to Santa Fe today. Send a telegram to a friend who might be able to help us. It will take most of the day. 4 hours there, 4 hours back, plus time in town. Kiona nodded slowly, studying his face intently. You think Hargrove will come? It was not a question. I know he will come, Ezekiel said flatly. The only questions are when and how many men he will bring. A man like Hargrove does not accept defiance. He cannot afford to. His power depends on people believing he always wins. Then we must be ready, Kiona said, her voice hard as flint striking steel. You teach us to fight, like white soldiers fight, with guns and strategy. You are not soldiers, Ezekiel said gently. You are women who have already survived more than most soldiers ever face. Kiona's eyes flashed like lightning. Apache women are warriors, she said, each word precise and deliberate. We hunt, we fight, we defend our families. My grandmother, she killed 2 Mexican soldiers who tried to take her daughter. My mother, she fight in 3 raids against Comanche. Just because we do not wear your army clothes does not mean we cannot kill when we must. Ezekiel studied her for a long moment, seeing the steel in her spine, the absolute conviction in her eyes. I believe you, he said finally. But first, food. Then we talk about preparation. You cannot fight well on an empty stomach. The cornmeal porridge was simple but surprisingly good. They ate without speaking, seasoned with something Ezekiel could not identify, but tasted faintly of sage and sweetness. One by one, the other sisters woke and joined in them. Tyann first, her face set in hard lines that spoke of grief not yet processed but carefully contained. She nodded to Ezekiel without speaking and took her bowl of porridge to a corner where she ate alone, staring at nothing. Then Helona emerged from the sleeping area, and Ezekiel's heart clenched at the fear still visible in every line of her body. She would not meet his eyes, would not come within 10 feet of him, and pressed herself against the wall as if trying to disappear into the wood itself. Whatever Hargrove's men had done to her before hanging her from that pole, it had carved wounds deeper than any rope burn. Adsila woke next, and in contrast to Helona, she looked around the cabin with open curiosity, her eyes bright and alert. She reminded Ezekiel of his daughter Emma at that age, eager to understand everything, asking endless questions about how the world worked. She sat down near the fire and touched things gently as if trying to understand this strange white man's world through her fingertips. The coffee pot, the iron skillet, the leather-bound books stacked on a crude shelf. Niobe woke last, and Ezekiel was pleased to see real color returning to her cheeks. The fever had broken completely. She would live. When she saw him, she smiled shyly and whispered something in Apache to Kiona that made all 5 sisters laugh, the first genuine laughter Ezekiel had heard from them. She says thank you, Kiona translated, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She says you are like the mountain spirits our grandmother told stories about when we were children. Strong and kind and always there when people need them, but invisible otherwise. Tell her she is very welcome, Ezekiel said, feeling warmth spread through his chest. Tell her I am glad she will live. The world needs more young people who can laugh. After they ate, Ezekiel saddled Ash and prepared for the long ride to Santa Fe. He checked the horse's legs and hooves carefully, making sure the animal was sound for another hard day. As he was tightening the cinch, Kiona approached and placed her hand on his arm, stopping him. When you come back, she said, looking up at him with those extraordinary amber eyes, you teach us? Teach us to shoot the guns like soldiers? Ezekiel hesitated, his hand still on the saddle. Do you understand what you are asking? If Hargrove comes and finds you armed, finds you capable of fighting back, he will not hesitate. He will give no quarter. He will kill you all without a second thought. He will kill us anyway, Kiona said flatly, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. At least if we have guns, we can take some of his men with us. At least we die fighting instead of hanging from ropes like animals waiting for slaughter. At least we die like warriors. There was no arguing with that logic, brutal as it was. When I return, Ezekiel said carefully, I will teach you everything I know. But understand this, all of you. He raised his voice so all 5 sisters could hear, so his words would carry weight. Guns are not magic talismans. They do not make you invincible. They are simply tools. And like all tools, they require practice and discipline and respect. Are you willing to learn? Truly learn, not just play at being soldiers? All 5 women nodded, even Helona, though she still would not look directly at him. And then we begin tonight when I return, Ezekiel said, and swung up into the saddle. He looked down at Kiona. Bar the door when I leave. Do not open it for anyone except me. If riders come, hide in the root cellar. The entrance is under that rug by the fireplace. There is food and water down there. You can survive 3 days if you must. We will not hide, Tyen said from her corner, her voice hard. If they come, we fight. With what? Ezekiel asked. Your hands? Be smart, not brave. Bravery without preparation is just dying foolishly. He rode out without waiting for a response, knowing they would argue if he gave them the chance. The trail down the mountain was treacherous in places, narrow paths where a single misstep would send horse and rider tumbling hundreds of feet down sheer rock faces. But Ash knew the way, had traveled it 100 times, and picked each step with careful precision. The ride to Santa Fe took 4 hours, following trails that switched back and forth down the mountain like stitches closing a wound. The town itself sprawled along the river, an old Spanish settlement now overrun with American commerce and ambition. Adobe buildings sat alongside new wooden structures, and the streets were crowded with wagons and horses and people speaking half a dozen languages. Ezekiel hated towns, hated the noise and the smell, and the way people looked at him like he was something dangerous that had wandered down from the mountains, which he supposed he was. He rode straight to the telegraph office, a small building that smelled of electricity and paper and the peculiar chemical odor of batteries. The operator, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers, looked up from his desk with the weary expression of someone who had heard every hard luck story the territory had to offer. Help you? He asked without much interest. Need to send a telegram to Fort Union, Ezekiel said. To Major Thomas Brennan, mark it urgent. The operator pulled out a standard form and dipped his pen in ink. Go ahead. Ezekiel spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully. Thomas? Stop. 5 Apache women attacked by Hargrove men. Stop. Currently at my cabin. Stop. Need assistance immediately. Stop. Situation urgent. Stop. Ezekiel Frost. The operator wrote it all down in his cramped shorthand, counted words with his pen tip, and said without looking up, that will be $3. Ezekiel paid with coins that felt heavy in his hand, each one representing weeks of trapping and selling furs. How long until he receives it? If he is at the fort right now, within the hour. If he is out on patrol, could be 3 days or more. I cannot control where your friend is, only where the message goes. Mark it urgent, Ezekiel repeated. Life or death, everything is urgent these days, the operator said with a tired shrug. But I will note it. Ezekiel left the telegraph office and stood in the dusty street, feeling exposed and vulnerable without the mountains around him. He needed supplies. Ammunition, most of all. Food that would keep. Medical supplies in case things went badly. He had perhaps $60 in gold coins hidden in a tin box under his cabin floor. Money he had been saving for years without really knowing what he was saving it for. Now he knew. He spent the next 3 hours moving methodically through Santa Fe's merchants, buying carefully and thinking tactically. At the general store, he purchased 100 rounds of .44-40 ammunition for the Winchester, the clerk raising an eyebrow but saying nothing. 50 rounds for the Colt revolver. 3 pounds of dried beans, 5 pounds of cornmeal, 2 pounds of coffee, which was expensive but necessary. Salt, sugar, a tin of baking powder. A box of 100 lucifer matches. At the apothecary, he bought bandages, carbolic acid for cleaning wounds, laudanum for pain, a bottle of whiskey for sterilization and other purposes. The pharmacist, an elderly man with kind eyes, asked, Someone sick up your way? Preparing for trouble, Ezekiel said carefully. Better to have supplies and not need them than need them and not have them. Wise philosophy, the pharmacist agreed, especially these days. He wrapped the medical supplies in brown paper and he tied it with string. You be careful, Mountain Man. I hear Hargrove has been stirring up trouble again. I will keep that in mind, Ezekiel said. At the General Mercantile, he bought 2 wool blankets, knowing that nights would be cold and the women had nothing warm, a cast-iron Dutch oven for cooking, 50 feet of good rope, a whetstone for sharpening knives. His last stop was the gunsmith's, a narrow building that smelled of oil and metal and burned powder. The owner, a German immigrant named Klaus Zimmer, who had sold Ezekiel his Winchester years ago, looked up from the rifle he was repairing and smiled with genuine warmth. Ah, Frost, Klaus said in his thick accent. Long time no see. 6 months? Maybe 7? What brings you to civilization? Teaching some people to shoot, Ezekiel said carefully, not wanting to explain too much. Need something simple, reliable, easy for beginners to learn. Klaus set down his tools and considered this. How many people we talking about? 5. All complete beginners. The gunsmith walked to his rack and pulled down a rifle with care. This he said, holding it up to the light. Spencer carbine, 7-shot repeater, used by Union cavalry during the war. Simple to load, simple to fire, nearly impossible to break. Accurate to 100 yards in good hands. I have 3 of them, $70 each. That is expensive, Ezekiel said, though he had expected as much. Good guns are expensive, Klaus replied with a shrug. Bad guns get you killed. Which do you prefer? I will take all 3, Ezekiel said, doing the mental arithmetic and wincing. And 5 boxes of ammunition. 50 rounds per box. Klaus raised both eyebrows. That is a lot of ammunition, my friend. You expecting war? Hoping to prevent one, Ezekiel said, but preparing for the worst. The gunsmith wrapped the rifles carefully in oilcloth and bundled the ammunition into a canvas sack. As Ezekiel counted out gold coins, feeling his savings evaporate like water in the desert sun, Klaus leaned close and said quietly, You in trouble with Hargrove, yes? Ezekiel met the man's eyes. What makes you think that? Because his man was in here 2 days ago. Big fellow, scar on his face, mean eyes, asking if anyone had seen 5 Apache women. Said they were stolen property. Said there was a reward for information leading to their recovery. What did you tell him? Ezekiel asked, his hand moving unconsciously toward his revolver. That I mind my own business and suggest others do the same, Klaus said firmly. I come to this country to escape men who think they own other people. I will not help such men here. He paused, then added, But Frost, you should know, Hargrove is a dangerous man, very dangerous. He does not forgive, and he does not forget. I am aware, Ezekiel said. Thank you for the warning, and for your discretion. One more thing, Klaus said, reaching under his counter. He pulled out a small pepper box pistol, 4 barrels arranged in a rotating cluster. This is for emergency, very close range only, accurate to maybe 10 feet, but fires 4 times before reload. Take it. Gift from me. I cannot accept, Ezekiel started to say. You can and you will, Klaus interrupted. I sell guns to make living. But sometimes guns must be given. Take it. Use it only if you must. But have it ready. Ezekiel accepted the small pistol, filling its unexpected weight. Thank you, truly. Do not thank me, Klaus said. Just survive. And if you can, kill Hargrove. World will be a better place without him. Ezekiel loaded everything onto Ash, the horse grunting under the added weight but not complaining beyond that single sound. The animal had carried heavier loads over worse terrain. As he prepared to mount, a voice called out from across the street. Ezekiel Frost, Billy said, his smile cold and knowing. The colonel has been looking for you. Has he? Ezekiel said flatly. Oh, yes. Billy stepped closer, his voice dropping. You made a mistake, mountain man, taking something that belongs to Hargrove. He gestured at the bundles on Ash's saddle. All that ammunition, all those rifles. You really think you can fight the colonel and win? I am not looking for a fight, Ezekiel said. Too late for that. Billy's smile widened. I reported what I saw. 5 Apache women in your cabin. The colonel is gathering his men right now. He will come for them. And for you. He paused. Last chance to make this easy, Frost. Tell me where your cabin is. Save yourself the trouble. You already know where I live, Ezekiel said. You have been watching me for years. Billy shrugged. True enough, just thought I would offer. He tipped his hat mockingly. See you soon, mountain man. Very soon. I will keep that in mind, Ezekiel said, swinging into the saddle. You do that, Billy said. And Frost? The colonel, he does not forget people who interfere with his business. Just friendly advice from one man to another. Ezekiel urged Ash into a walk without responding. As he rode out of town, he could feel Billy's eyes on his back, could imagine the man already running to wherever Hargrove was staying, reporting that Ezekiel Frost had been in Santa Fe buying enough ammunition to fight a small war. The timeline had just compressed. Whatever was coming would come soon. Now, the ride back took longer, the sun climbing toward noon and the temperature rising until sweat soaked through his shirt. When he finally crested the ridge above his cabin, he stopped and studied the valley below with tactical precision. Everything looked peaceful, smoke still rising from the chimney, no sign of disturbance, no strange tracks in the dirt except his own from this morning. He relaxed slightly, but only slightly, and guided Ash down the trail. When he was still 50 yards from the cabin, the door opened and Kiona stepped out. In her hands was his Colt revolver, held with both hands in a proper grip, pointed directly at his center mass. Her stance was good, weight balanced, eyes focused. "Identify yourself," she called out in clear English. "It is Ezekiel," he said, impressed despite himself. "You can lower the gun now." "How I know it is really you," she challenged. "Could be trick. Could be someone wearing your clothes." Very smart, Ezekiel thought, because if it was not me, I would not know that Niabi has a small birthmark on her left shoulder shaped like a crescent moon, or that Tyan talks in her sleep about someone named Chaska, or that you grind your teeth at night when you are thinking about your father. Kiona lowered the gun. "You are very observant, man," Ezekiel Frost. "I am alive because I observe everything," he said, dismounting. "Where did you learn to hold a pistol like that?" "My father showed me when I am 12 summers old," Kiona said. "He say Apache women must know how to defend themselves, even if men do not approve, even if tradition says otherwise." She paused, then added, "But he died before he could teach me to shoot well." "Then we will finish what he started," Ezekiel said. He began unloading supplies, and the other sisters came out to help. Even Helona, though she was careful to stay at least 6 feet away from him at all times. They worked together in silence, carrying everything inside and organizing it efficiently. The women moved with coordination that spoke of years working together, understanding each other without words. When everything was stored, Ezekiel unwrapped the 3 Spencer carbines and laid them carefully on the table. "These are for you," he said. "Simpler to operate than my Winchester. Easier for beginners to learn. Each one holds 7 rounds and fires as fast as you can work the lever." Tayan picked up one immediately, turning it over in her hands with the intense focus of someone truly studying a tool. "This holds 7 bullets?" she asked. She'd tell him. 7 cartridges, yes, Ezekiel confirmed. "I will show you how to load them, how to fire them, how to maintain them so they do not fail when you need them most." For the next 3 hours, as the afternoon sun slanted through the cabin windows, turning dust motes into golden dancers, Ezekiel taught 5 Apache women the fundamental basics of firearms. How to load the tubular magazine, how to work the lever action, how to aim using the rear notch and front post, how to squeeze the trigger slowly instead of jerking it, how to account for distance and wind, how to clean and maintain the weapons so they would function reliably. Kiona learned fastest, her hands steady and her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She absorbed information like dry earth soaking up rain and immediately applied it. Tyan was close behind, her face set with grim determination. Every movement precise and controlled. She handled the rifle like it was sacred, like it was the key to revenge she had been denied. Atsila struggled at first, her small hands having difficulty working the stiff lever, but she kept trying with the stubborn determination of someone who refused to accept failure. Niabi, still weak from her ordeal with heat stroke, mostly watched and listened, but Ezekiel could see her memorizing everything, storing it away for when she had the strength to practice. Helona held the rifle like it might explode in her hands, and Ezekiel did not push her. Trauma took time to heal, and forcing her would only make things worse. He showed her the basics, spoke to her in quiet tones, and let her work at her own pace without judgment. When the sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple, Ezekiel took them outside for actual shooting practice. He set up targets made from old flour sacks stuffed with dried grass, placed them at 25 yards, and stepped back. "Now we find out if you learned anything," he said. "Kiona, you first." She stepped up to the firing line he had marked with a stick in the dirt, raised the Spencer to her shoulder, and sighted down the barrel. Her first shot went wide by 2 feet, the recoil surprising her. Her second shot hit the target low and left. But her third shot, after she had adjusted and learned, hit center mass, and Ezekiel saw her smile for the first time, fierce and proud and alive. "Again," she said immediately, "I want to shoot again." The sound of gunfire echoed off the surrounding mountains like thunder, and Ezekiel knew it would carry for miles. Anyone listening would know that someone at his cabin was practicing with rifles. But there was no help for it. If these women were going to survive what was coming, they needed to be at minimum competent, Incompetence required practice regardless of the tactical disadvantage of advertising their position. By the time full darkness fell and Ezekiel called a halt, all 5 women had fired at least 30 rounds each. Tyen proved to be the best natural shot, her aim steady and cold, her movements economical. Kiona was close behind, learning with frightening speed. Even Adsila managed to hit the target more often than not by the end. Helona still struggled, but she had at least stopped flinching violently every time she pulled the trigger, which Ezekiel counted as progress. Inside, as they cleaned the rifles by lamplight, following Ezekiel's careful instruction, Tyen spoke suddenly. The hard shell that grief had built around her seemed to crack slightly, and her voice came out raw and painful. "My beloved Chaska," she said, not looking up from the rifle she was wiping down with an oiled rag. "He died because he have no gun, no way to fight from distance. Hargrove's men shoot him from maybe 100 yards away. He cannot reach them, cannot defend, he just die. Like animal in field, who not know danger is coming." Kiona reached over and took her sister's hand, squeezing it gently. "We will make them pay," she said quietly but with absolute conviction. "For Chaska, for father, for all of our people who die because they have no way to fight against rifles and revolvers. Revenge will not bring him back," Ezekiel said gently, remembering his own thoughts about revenge over the years. "Will not make the loss hurt less." "No," Tyen agreed, looking up at him with eyes that held an ocean of pain. "But it will honor his memory. It will give his death meaning. And maybe it save others from same death. Is that not worth something?" "Yes," Ezekiel admitted. "That is worth something." That night, after the women had retreated to the sleeping area and he could hear their breathing settling into the rhythms of sleep, Ezekiel sat outside by a small fire and thought about Thomas Brennan. They had served together in the war, both of them sharpshooters assigned to the 2nd Maine, both of them men who preferred to work alone rather than in the chaos of Maine battle lines. After Gettysburg, where they had held Cemetery Ridge against wave after wave of Confederate assault, where they had fired until their rifles were too hot to touch and still kept firing, Ezekiel had deserted, not out of cowardice, but because he could no longer stomach what the war had become. The casual cruelty, the senseless slaughter, the way men could look at other men and see only targets to be eliminated. He had signed up to preserve the Union and free enslaved people, noble goals he still believed in. But somewhere along the way, the war had stopped being about ideas and become about killing. Just killing. An endless grinding machine that devoured young men and spit out corpses. Brennan had caught him leaving camp, had found Ezekiel already 2 miles down the road, walking into darkness with nothing but his rifle and a canteen and the clothes on his back. They had stood facing each other on that empty dirt road under a moon so bright you could read by it. And Ezekiel had expected to be arrested, tried, and shot as a deserter. Instead, Brennan had studied him for a long moment and then said, "I will report that you died of camp fever. It is going around. No one will question it. Bourgeois, live. Find something worth living for. And try to remember that some of us are still here trying to do the right thing, even when everything is wrong." Ezekiel had walked away that night and never looked back, carrying Thomas Brennan's mercy like a stone in his chest. He had tried to find something worth living for, had found Margaret and Emma for a brief shining moment, and then lost them. And since their deaths, he had existed rather than lived, going through motions without purpose or hope. Until 4 days ago when he found 5 women hanging from poles in the desert, now sitting by his small fire under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. He wondered if Brennan would receive the telegram, if he would come, if cavalry could arrive before Hargrove made his move. It was a lot of conditional hope stacked on uncertain foundations. He had learned during the war that plans rarely survived contact with reality, that hope was often just another word for self-deception. A sound in the darkness made him reach for his rifle, but it was only Kiona, wrapped in one of the new wool blankets, approaching the fire. She sat down across from him without asking permission, settling into the dirt with the ease of someone accustomed to sleeping on the ground. "You do not sleep?" she asked. "Not much these days," he admitted. "Old habit from the war, sleep light and wake at any sound. It has kept me alive but made rest difficult." "I also do not sleep well," Kiona said, staring into the flames. "Too many thoughts, too many memories. The past is loud in the quiet." They sat together quietly, listening to the night sounds of the forest, an owl hunting somewhere in the darkness, the distant howl of a coyote, the wind moving through pine trees like whispered conversations. Finally, Kiona spoke again, her voice very soft. What I say to you, she began carefully, when you first find us on those poles, about bearing your children, about being your woman in every way. I say it because I think we are all about to die. I want my sisters to have chance at life, even if I must sell myself to buy it. I know, Ezekiel said, and you owe me nothing. Not then, not now, not ever. But now, Kiona continued, her eyes reflecting firelight like molten gold, I wonder about different things. If circumstances were not so bad, if I not owe you my life, if I could choose freely with no debt or obligation, would I make same offer but for different reason? That is a dangerous thing to wonder about, Ezekiel said, his throat suddenly tight. Dangerous, yes, Kiona agreed. But still, I wonder. You are not like other white men I have known. You save us without asking for payment. You teach us without expecting service. You treat us like human beings with value and dignity, like equals. She leaned forward slightly, the blanket falling away from her shoulders. You are first white man who look at me and see person instead of thing, to own or use or kill. That is how you should be treated, Ezekiel said. That is how everyone should be treated, regardless of the color of their skin or where they were born. But they are not, Kiona said simply. So when I meet someone who does treat me that way, it makes me wonder. Wonder about things that probably should not be wondered about. Is that wrong? No, Ezekiel said after a long pause. That is not wrong. That is just being human. They sat together by the fire until the flames burned down to glowing coals that pulsed like a beating heart. When Kiona finally rose to return to the cabin, she paused and placed her hand briefly on Ezekiel's shoulder. It was the lightest touch imaginable, barely contact at all, but it burned through his shirt like a brand. Sleep if you can, she said. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. Tomorrow always does, Ezekiel replied. Inside the cabin, as Kiona lay down carefully beside her sleeping sisters, she thought about the white man outside keeping watch through the darkness, about his sad gray eyes that had seen too much, about his steady hands that killed and healed with equal competence, about the way he had cut them down from those poles without even asking their names, about the way he taught them to shoot without any condescension or doubt, about the way he treated them like warriors instead of victims. And she allowed herself, just for a few dangerous moments, to imagine a world where things were different, where her father was still alive and her people were not fighting for bare survival, and she could meet this strange mountain man as a free woman making a free choice. What would she decide then? She did not know. The question was too large, too complicated, touched on too many things she had never been allowed to even consider before. But the wondering itself felt like a small rebellion against fate, and she held onto it like a precious, secret treasure. Outside, Ezekiel finally allowed himself to sleep, his rifle across his lap and his back against the cabin wall, and his mind full of amber-colored eyes that seemed to see straight through all his carefully constructed defenses. He dreamed as he always did of Margaret and Emma, but tonight the dream was different. Tonight they were smiling and waving goodbye instead of lying cold in their beds. And Margaret's voice said clearly, Live, Ezekiel. Stop punishing yourself and start living again. We are gone, but you are still here. Make it count. He woke before true dawn with unexpected tears drying on his face, and he did not know if they were tears of grief or relief or gratitude or all three mixed together into something that had no name. He only knew that something fundamental had shifted inside him, some frozen thing beginning to slowly thaw, and he was not at all sure if that was a blessing or a curse. The next 3 days passed in a steady rhythm of preparation and training that felt almost like normal life. Each morning, Ezekiel took the women through shooting practice, gradually increasing the difficulty. First 25 yards, then 50, then 75. He taught them to shoot from different positions, standing, kneeling, prone. He taught them to reload quickly under pressure, to clear jams, to estimate range. Each afternoon, he taught them about defensive tactics, how to create fields of fire with overlapping coverage, how to use terrain and structures for protection, how to coordinate movement without verbal communication. The difference between cover that stopped, bullets, and concealment that only blocked vision. Each evening, they cleaned weapons meticulously and ate simple meals and tried not to think too hard about what was surely coming. The women moved through these tasks with growing confidence, their fear slowly being replaced by competence. They were learning that they were not helpless, and that knowledge changed how they carried themselves, how they looked at the world. Niobe recovered fully, her youth and natural resilience carrying her through. Helona slowly began to open up, speaking more, making brief eye contact, staying in the same room with Ezekiel for longer periods. The trauma was still there, still raw and painful, but she was beginning to believe that not all men were monsters, and that small shift made everything else possible. Atzila's curiosity led her to ask endless questions about everything. How did the rifle work mechanically? Why did bullets drop over distance? What was the difference between accuracy and precision? Her thirst for knowledge was unquenchable, and Ezekiel found himself teaching her to read from his small collection of books. She learned with astonishing speed, absorbing written English as fast as he could present it. Tayen remained hard and focused, transforming her grief into deadly competence. She practiced longer than anyone else, firing until her shoulder was bruised from recoil, until she could hit a man-sized target at 100 yards 9 times out of 10. She was becoming exactly what she wanted to be: dangerous. And Kiona was a constant presence at Ezekiel's side, learning everything he could teach, asking questions that showed real tactical intelligence, proving herself a natural leader. They developed an unspoken communication, able to convey complex ideas with just a glance or small gesture. It was the kind of deep understanding that usually took years to develop, but Crisis had compressed time into something concentrated and powerful and strange. On the third night, as they sat cleaning weapons after practice, Atzila spoke up. She had gradually moved closer to Ezekiel over the past days, her initial fear completely replaced by trust and affection. "Mr. Frost," she said in her careful but improving English, "you have books, many books. Can you teach me to read better? In my language, I read Apache writing that missionaries create, but white man's books are different. More words, more ideas. I can teach you," Ezekiel said, pleased by her hunger to learn. "But tell me, why is this so important to you?" Itzila was quiet for a long moment, thinking carefully. "My father once said to me, 'Knowledge is power,'" she finally said. "He say Apache must learn white man's ways if we want to survive. Not become like white men. Never that. But understand them. Know how they think, how they plan, how they see world. Only then can we defend against them." "Your father was a very wise man," Ezekiel said. "He was," Kiona agreed softly, "too wise for this cruel world. Perhaps that is why they had to kill him. Wise men make tyrants nervous." "Tell me about him," Ezekiel said. "Tell me about Chief Cochetta." Kiona set down the rifle she had been cleaning and stared into space as if seeing the past overlaid on the present. "My father," she began slowly, "was leader not because he was born to it, but because the people chose him. He became chief because he was fair in all judgments, because he listened to everyone, even children and old women, because he always put the welfare of the people before his own desires." She was quiet for a moment, then continued. "When the white soldiers come 15 years ago and say we must move to reservation, give up our lands and our way of life, he said no. This is our land, he told them. Our ancestors' bones are in this earth. We will not leave it. And he gathered warriors from all the Chiricahua bands, and he fought. For 3 years he held them off. 3 years of raids and battles and negotiations that led nowhere. The soldiers could not defeat him in the mountains because he knew every canyon, every trail, every water source. So they changed tactics. What did they do? Ezekiel asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. They sent men like Hargrove, Kiona said, her voice hardening to match her eyes. Men who do not wear army uniforms. Men who kill without rules or honor. They would ambush our supply trains. They would poison water holes. They would attack when only women and children were present. They fought without honor, so they did not have to follow army regulations. And then Hargrove came with his papers, his false claims, his invented debts. He said Father owed him money for rifles we never purchased. When Father refused to acknowledge this lie, said it was forgery and fraud, Hargrove shot him. Just shot him in front of the whole tribe, in front of me and my sisters. And the soldiers did nothing because Hargrove claimed it was legal debt collection. Her hands clenched into tight fists, knuckles white. That is when he took us. Said we were payment for the fabricated debt. Said he would sell us to a brothel in Tucson unless the tribe surrendered all land claims. But tribe had no leader now, no one with authority to speak for everyone. So he hung us on those poles to force their hand, to make them so desperate they would agree to anything. And then you came, Tayen added quietly from her corner. You came like a spirit from the mountains. like the old gods our grandmother spoke of. And you saved us when no one else would or could. I did what anyone should have done, Ezekiel said. But nobody else did, Kiona said, leaning forward with intensity. That is what matters. That is why we trust you. Not because you are white or powerful, but because when you could have looked away, when you could have ridden past and pretended not to see, you chose to help. You chose to see us as human. That choice is everything. The next morning, as Ezekiel was checking the perimeter of the cabin with the careful attention he gave to everything related to security, he found tracks. Fresh tracks from the previous night, maybe 5 hours old. Boot prints, size 10 or 11, moving in a careful circle around the cabin, staying just beyond the range of firelight, observing and counting and planning. He followed the tracks for half a mile before they reached a place where a horse had been tethered to a juniper tree. The horse had headed south when it left, back toward Hargrove's territory, back toward whatever headquarters the man operated from. When Ezekiel returned to the cabin, his face must have shown something significant, because Kiona immediately set down the coffee pot she was filling and asked, "What is wrong?" "Someone was watching us last night," Ezekiel said flatly. One man, he circled the entire cabin, stayed just out of sight, and then rode south when morning approached. "Scout," Tayan said immediately, her face going hard. "Hargrove sends Scout to check if we still here, to count how many, to see if we have weapons, which means he knows exactly where we are," Kiona said. "Which means he will come soon, very soon. He cannot afford to wait long. Every day that passes, we get stronger and more prepared." "Yes," Ezekiel agreed grimly. "The only questions now are when and how many men he will bring, and whether my message reached Thomas Brennan in time. Then we prepare as best we can," Kiona said with decision. "We set traps. We fortify positions. We make this cabin into a fortress that costs him dearly." For the rest of that day and into the night, they worked with focused urgency. Ezekiel showed them how to create defensive positions that protected the shooter while allowing clear lines of sight in multiple directions. They moved water barrels inside in case of siege. They stockpiled ammunition in several locations throughout the cabin so they would not be caught without bullets if one cache was discovered or destroyed. Adsilla, with her quick mind and nimble fingers, proved unexpectedly adept at creating simple traps. Under Ezekiel's guidance, she built snares using rope and tension that would catch a man's ankle if he stepped in the wrong place. Nothing lethal necessarily, but enough to slow attackers down and create confusion and noise. They moved furniture to create firing positions with cover. They marked distances to key points outside so they could estimate range quickly. They practiced movement between positions inside the cabin so they could shift and adapt if part of their defense collapsed. As the sun set on the 4th day since the rescue, Ezekiel stood on the ridge above his cabin and looked south toward where he knew Hargrove was planning and preparing and gathering his forces. Somewhere out there, evil was sharpening its knives. And here, in this small cabin, clinging to a mountainside, 6 people were preparing to stand against it. He heard footsteps behind him and knew without turning that it was Kiona. She moved in a way that was distinctly hers now, that he could identify from sound alone. Light but purposeful, with the balance of someone who had spent a lifetime in mountains. "You think he will come tonight?" she asked quietly. "Maybe tonight," Ezekiel said, "maybe tomorrow. But soon, very soon, the scout would have reported back by now. Hargrove knows what he faces, and men like him do not hesitate once they decide to act." "We are ready," Kiona said, and there was no false bravado in her voice. Just fact. "As ready as we can be." "As ready as anyone can be," Ezekiel agreed. They stood together in the fading light, watching the sun paint the mountains in impossible shades of orange and purple and red. In that perfect moment before the storm arrived, Ezekiel felt something he had not felt in 12 long years. He felt truly alive, not just existing day to day, not just going through the mechanical motions of survival, but genuinely alive, present, connected to something beyond himself. And it terrified him more than any number of Hargrove's gunmen ever could, because now he had something to lose again. He had 5 women depending on him. He had Kiona standing beside him with amber eyes that saw too much. He had a reason to survive beyond mere stubbornness, and after 12 years of existing in emotional stasis, that sudden rush of caring was overwhelming and frightening and impossible to ignore. "What are you thinking about?" Kiona asked softly. "That I spent 12 years being dead," Ezekiel said honestly. And now, suddenly, I am alive again. And I do not know if that is a gift or a curse. It is a gift, Kiona said with quiet certainty. Always a gift, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because the dead feel nothing, and you are feeling everything. Yes, Ezekiel agreed. Yes, I suppose I am. They remained on the ridge until full darkness fell, and the stars emerged one by one like silver promises scattered across black velvet. Then they walked down together to the cabin, to the warmth and light and the four other women waiting inside, and prepared for whatever the night might bring. Because the storm was coming. They could feel it in the air, taste it on the wind, sense it in the way the forest had gone quiet. And when it arrived, they would face it together. 6 people against whatever evil could throw at them. It should have felt hopeless. But somehow, standing there in the doorway, looking back at 5 Apache women who had learned to shoot and fight and refused to be victims, Ezekiel thought that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Not a good chance, but a chance. And sometimes, in this hard world, that was enough. The attack came at 3 in the morning, in that dead hour when the human body craves sleep most desperately and awareness dims to its lowest point. Ezekiel woke to a sound so subtle that most men would have missed it entirely, would have dismissed it as wind or an animal moving through brush. But he had not survived 3 years of war and over a decade of mountain solitude by ignoring his instincts. And his instincts were screaming that something was wrong. He was on his feet instantly, Winchester in hand, moving to the window with practiced silence. The moon was a thin crescent, providing barely enough light to see shapes but not details. He strained his eyes and ears, filtering through the normal night sounds of the forest, searching for the discordant note that had woken him. There. The soft creak of leather, the muffled jingle of a bit chain quickly silenced, the barely audible whisper of men trying to coordinate in darkness. They were out there, multiple riders, moving into position around the cabin. Ezekiel moved to the door and knocked twice, hard and sharp. Inside the cabin, he heard immediate movement. The women were awake instantly, trained now by days of drilling to respond to his signal without hesitation or confusion. He opened the door just wide enough to slip inside and found all 5 women already up, reaching for their rifles with hands that shook slightly but moved with purpose. Kiona met his eyes across the dim interior, and he saw no fear there, just readiness and a cold determination that matched his own. "They are here," he said quietly. "I count at least 10 horses, maybe more. Coming from the south. They will surround us first, then call for surrender." "We do not surrender," Tayan said flatly, working the lever of her Spencer carbine to chamber around with a metallic click that sounded too loud in the tense silence. "No," Ezekiel agreed, "we do not." He moved to the center of the cabin where he had arranged their defensive positions over the past 3 days. "Kiona, you take the north window. Tayan, south. Adsila, east. I will cover west. Niabi and Helona, you stay in the root cellar unless I call for you. Your job is to keep ammunition ready and pass it up when we need it." The women moved to their positions without argument, each one settling into the spots they had practiced. Ezekiel had moved furniture to create barriers that would stop or deflect bullets while leaving gaps for return fire. It was not perfect, but it was better than nothing. And in combat, better than nothing often meant the difference between breathing and not breathing. His weapons were ready. Winchester, Colt, Bowie knife, and the pepper box Klaus had given him. Everything he needed to survive the next few minutes, if luck held. The cabin fell into tense silence, everyone holding their breath, waiting. Ezekiel could hear his own heartbeat, steady and slow despite the adrenaline starting to flood his system. This was familiar territory. He had done this before at Gettysburg, at Shiloh, at a dozen nameless fields that existed now only in memory and nightmare. The waiting before violence. The stretch moment when anything was still possible, when death was probable but not yet certain. A voice shattered the silence like a rock through glass. It came from perhaps 50 yards south, loud and confident and carrying the arrogance of a man who believed himself in complete control. "Ezekiel Calloway, I know you are in there. This is Jack Reese, speaking on behalf of Colonel Silas Hargrove. You are harboring stolen property. 5 Apache women who belong legally to the colonel. Send them out now and you will not be harmed." Ezekiel said nothing. He had learned in the war that sometimes silence was the best response, that talking gave away information about numbers and positions and states of mind. Let them wonder, let them guess, let uncertainty eat at their confidence. Reese tried again, his voice taking on an edge of irritation. Calloway, do not be foolish. We have you surrounded. 10 armed men against one. You cannot win this. Send out the women and walk away. This does not concern you. Still, Ezekiel remained silent, his eyes scanning the darkness for movement, for the telltale shape of a man against the slightly lighter sky. Beside him, Kiona crouched at her window, rifle ready, her breathing controlled and steady. She had learned well. They all had. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, they would at least die fighting instead of hanging from poles like animals. I am giving you 5 minutes, Calloway, Reese shouted, anger now clear in his voice. 5 minutes to comply. After that, we burn you out. You hear me? We will burn that shack to the ground with you in it. Ezekiel finally spoke, his voice carrying easily across the distance, calm and measured and absolutely cold. Reese, I remember you. You are the man who shot that farmer in Santa Fe. Shot him in the back while he was running away, while his children watched. There was a pause. Then Reese called back, defensive now. I was following orders, that is all. Following orders, Ezekiel repeated. That is what they all say. The men who commit atrocities always have that excuse, just following orders, as if that absolves them, as if that makes the blood wash off their hands. You do not understand, Reese said, and there was something almost desperate in his voice now. You live up here alone, judging everyone, but you do not know what it is like. Hargrove pays good money. A man has to feed his family. A man has to look at himself in a mirror too, Ezekiel said. Can you? Can you look at yourself and see anything other than a coward who kills unarmed people for money? Damn you, Calloway, Reese snarled. Damn you to hell. You want to die protecting Apache savages? Fine. We will make it happen. Boys, get ready to burn them out. Ezekiel heard movement in the darkness, men dismounting, spreading out, preparing for assault. He turned slightly and whispered to the women, when they come, aim center mass. Do not try for headshots. Do not waste ammunition. Every bullet counts. And do not hesitate. They will not show you mercy, so you cannot afford to show them any. We understand, Kiona said softly. We are ready. The waiting stretched out, seconds feeling like hours. Then Ezekiel saw it. A flicker of movement maybe 70 yards out. A man carrying something. The shape was wrong for a weapon. It was a torch. They were actually going to try to burn them out. He raised the Winchester and sighted carefully. The range was long but manageable. He exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The Winchester's report shattered the night like thunder. The man carrying the torch jerked and fell, the torch tumbling from his hands and guttering out in the dirt. Someone shouted in alarm. The element of surprise was gone now. It was real. Combat had begun. Return fire came immediately, muzzle flashes blooming in the darkness like deadly flowers. Bullets struck the cabin walls with heavy thuds, punching through thin wood but losing most of their energy in the process. A few found the gaps in their makeshift fortifications, whining past dangerously close. But Ezekiel had positioned everyone well. The furniture and thick cabin logs were doing their job, turning potential killing shots into near misses. Fire at will, Ezekiel ordered. Pick your targets, make them count. Kiona fired from her position, the Spencer carbine barking sharply. A man screamed, and Ezekiel knew she had hit something vital. She did not celebrate, just worked the lever smoothly and found another target, exactly as he had taught her. Tayan was firing methodically from the south window, 3 shots in quick succession, each one carefully aimed. She was in the zone now, that strange mental state where fear disappeared and only cold calculation remained. Another scream, another hit. Even Adsilla was firing, though her hands trembled slightly and her shots were less accurate. But she was shooting, overcoming her fear, proving herself braver than she probably believed possible. That was what combat did. It revealed who you really were under all the civilized pretense. The initial assault lasted perhaps 5 minutes, though it felt much longer. Then Reese's voice cut through the gunfire. Fall back, and regroup. The firing ceased abruptly as Hargrove's men retreated beyond effective range. Ezekiel used the lull to assess. His hearing was ringing from the confined gunfire, his nose full of acrid powder smoke. But he was unhurt. He checked each woman quickly. Kiona, status? I am fine. I think I hit 2 men, maybe 3. Tayan? Unharmed. I definitely hit one. He is not moving. Itzila, I am okay. I do not know if I hit anyone. I tried. You did well, Ezekiel said. All of you did. He reloaded the Winchester, his hands moving automatically through the familiar motions. That was their probing attack. They wanted to see what we had. Now they know we can shoot back. They will be more careful. What do we do now? Neebe asked from the root cellar entrance, her young face pale but determined. We wait, Ezekiel said, and we prepare for the next attack. Because there will be a next attack. Men like Reese cannot go back to Hargrove and admit they were driven off by one man and 5 women. Their pride will not allow it. They waited in tense silence for perhaps 20 minutes. Then they heard it, a sound that made Ezekiel's blood run cold despite all his experience. Hoofbeats, many hoofbeats, coming fast from the north. For a moment he thought Hargrove had reinforcements arriving, that they were about to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Then he heard something that made hope surge in his chest like a physical force. A trumpet, a cavalry trumpet sounding charge. Thomas Brennan had received his telegram. The cavalry was coming. The hoofbeats grew louder, and now Ezekiel could see them in the pre-dawn darkness. 30 horses, maybe more, coming fast with the reckless courage of men who knew they had the numbers and training to win any fight. Leading them on a white horse that seemed to glow in the faint light was a man Ezekiel would recognize anywhere. Major Thomas Brennan, older now but still sitting a horse like he was born to it. The cavalry swept past the cabin and directly into Reese's men before they could scatter. It was not even a fight. It was a rout. Hargrove's hired gunmen found themselves suddenly facing trained soldiers with superior numbers and discipline. Some tried to flee. Some tried to fight. None succeeded. Within minutes, it was over. 8 of Reese's men were in custody, hands tied behind their backs. 2 were dead. Reese himself was on his knees with a cavalry saber pressed against his throat. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. Ezekiel stepped out of the cabin cautiously, Winchester still ready despite the apparent victory. Brennan dismounted and walked toward him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. 2 old soldiers meeting again after years of silence. Thomas, Ezekiel said. Ezekiel, Brandon replied, you look like hell. You look pretty good for someone who should be retired. They grasped forearms in the soldier's greeting, and Ezekiel felt warmth flood through him, despite the danger. This man had saved his life once by lying about his desertion. Now he had saved it again by arriving at the exact moment needed. Some debts could never be repaid, only acknowledged. I got your telegram, Brennan said. Came as fast as we could. Looks like we arrived just in time. Just in time indeed, Ezekiel agreed. 5 more minutes, and they would have burned us out. Brennan looked past Ezekiel to where the 5 Apache women were emerging cautiously from the cabin, rifles still in hand. His eyebrows rose. So the telegram was accurate. 5 Apache women. And Hargrove was trying to claim them as property? He is claiming their father owed him money, Ezekiel explained. $15,000 supposedly. For rifles the chief never purchased. When the chief refused to acknowledge this fraudulent debt, Hargrove shot him, then took his daughters as payment. That is not how law works, Brennan said, his face hardening. That is kidnapping, murder, slavery under another name. Exactly, Ezekiel said, which is why I intervened and made yourself a target in the process, Brennan observed. Very noble and very stupid, old friend. Story of my life, Ezekiel said with a slight smile. Noble and stupid. Brennan turned and shouted orders to his men. Sergeant O'Malley, secure the prisoners. Post guards in a perimeter. No one approaches this cabin without my permission. Then he turned back to Ezekiel. We need to talk, inside. There are complications you need to understand. They went inside, Brennan ducking slightly through the doorway. The cabin felt crowded with 7 people, but they managed. Kiona stood near Ezekiel, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Brennan noticed this with interest, but said nothing. First things first, Brennan said. Introductions. I am Major Thomas Brennan, United States Cavalry, Fort Union. And you are? Kiona stepped forward with quiet dignity. I am Kiona, eldest daughter of Chief Cochetta of the Chiricahua Apache. These are my sisters, Tyen, Halona, Atsila, and Nyabe. We are grateful for your help, Major. Miss Kiona, Brennan said with a respectful nod. I am glad we arrived in time. But I must be honest with you. The situation is more complicated than simply rescuing you from Hargrove's men. How complicated? Ezekiel asked, not liking the tone in his friend's voice. Brennan pulled folded papers from inside his coat. Very complicated. I stopped in Santa Fe before coming here. Spoke with the territorial governor's office. Hargrove filed legal documents claiming Chief Cochetta owed him money. The debt supposedly stems from a rifle purchase made 3 years ago. He has what appear to be legitimate bills of sale, signed contracts, even a promissory note with the chief's mark on it. All forged, Kiona said immediately. My father could not write English. He would never mark any paper without tribal council present, and he never purchased rifles from Hargrove. We captured our weapons in raids or traded for them. I believe you, Brennan said, but belief and legal proof are different things. The territorial governor, Lew Wallace, has already validated Hargrove's claim. According to the official record, your father died owing $15,000. And under territorial law, debts can be collected from family members. So the law says Hargrove owns them? Ezekiel said, his voice dangerous. Not quite, Brennan said. Here is where it gets interesting. I also sent a telegram to the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington and to Archbishop Lamy in Santa Fe. The Archbishop is very interested in this case. Why would a Catholic Archbishop care about Apache women, Tayan asked. Because of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Brennan explained. When the United States took this territory from Mexico, we agreed to honor certain Spanish colonial laws. One of those laws gave the Catholic Church protection rights over indigenous people on mission lands. If you can prove you were living under church protection, territorial law does not apply. Federal law takes precedence. Were you living near a mission? Ezekiel asked Kiona. The old mission Santa Maria, Kiona said. 20 miles from where you found us. It was burned 6 months ago. The priest was killed. But yes, our band had agreement with church for many years. Then we have an argument, Brennan said. If Archbishop Lamy confirms that your people were under church protection, I can challenge Hargrove's claim in federal court. It will take time, but we might win. And in the meantime, Ezekiel asked? In the meantime, you are in danger, Brennan said bluntly. I arrested 8 of Hargrove's men tonight, but he has at least 30 more. And now that I have directly opposed him, he will escalate. He has to. Men like Hargrove cannot afford to look weak. So what do you suggest? Kiona asked. Come to Fort Union with me, Brennan said. All of you, under military protection, you will be safe while the legal process works itself out. No, Kiona said immediately. We will not hide. We will not run. It is not hiding, Brennan argued. It is being strategic. Kiona shook her head firmly. My whole life we have been forced to run. Forced to hide. Forced to surrender land and dignity because we were not strong enough to fight. I am done running. If Hargrove wants us, he can come, and we will show him that Apache women are not property to be owned. Brennan looked at Ezekiel. You gonna let her make this choice? She is a free woman making a free choice, Ezekiel said. It is not my place to let or not let her do anything. Even if that choice gets her killed? Better to die free than live as property, Kiona said before Ezekiel could respond. You are soldier, Major. You understand this. Sometimes death is preferable to dishonor. Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. You sound like my commander at Gettysburg. He said almost the same thing before leading a charge that killed half our regiment. He paused. I admired him greatly. Still do, but I also attended his funeral. We will be careful, Ezekiel said. We will prepare. We will not throw our lives away foolishly. I can leave 10 men here, Brennan said. Under Sergeant O'Malley, they can help fortify this position. But Ezekiel, you need to understand something. 10 men against 30, even with fortifications. Those are terrible odds. I have survived worse odds, Ezekiel said. In the war, yes, Brennan agreed. But you were younger then, and you did not have 5 women to protect. These 5 women just drove off 10 attackers, Ezekiel said. They can shoot, they can fight. Do not underestimate them. Brennan looked at the 5 sisters with new respect. You taught them? I taught them basics, Ezekiel said, but the courage was already there. I just showed them how to channel it. Then I suppose you have made your choice, Brennan said. He stood and extended his hand to Ezekiel. I will do what I can from the legal side. Archbishop Lamy should arrive in 3 days. If he validates church protection, we have grounds to challenge Hargrove in federal court. And if Hargrove attacks before then? Ezekiel asked. Then you fight, Brennan said simply, and I will come as fast as I can when word reaches me. But know this, old friend, Hargrove is not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. You have humiliated him tonight. He will want revenge, and when he comes next time, It will not be with 10 men. It will be with everything he has. I understand, Ezekiel said. Brennan turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Be careful of a man named Silas Cobb. Bounty hunter. Very dangerous. Very good at what he does. There are rumors Hargrove has hired him. If Cobb comes for you, do not try to face him alone. He has killed 27 men. Never failed. Never shown mercy. I will remember that, Ezekiel said. After Brennan and most of his men departed, leaving Sergeant O'Malley and 10 soldiers to help fortify the cabin, Ezekiel and the women gathered around the table to plan. Sergeant O'Malley, a weathered Irishman with a thick accent and kind eyes, proved to be intelligent and experienced. The cabin is defensible, O'Malley said, studying the layout. Good sight lines, strong logs. But if they bring fire, it becomes a trap. We need to prepare for evacuation if burning becomes necessary. Where would we evacuate to? Edsela asked. The high ground, Ezekiel said, pointing north through the window toward the mountain ridge rising behind his cabin. There are caves up there, good cover, multiple escape routes. If we lose the cabin, we fall back to the caves and make them come at us uphill. Smart, O'Malley agreed. Uphill assaults are bloody work. He looked around at the women. You lasses can really shoot? It was not just lucky shots earlier? Show him, Ezekiel said to Kiona. They went outside where O'Malley's men had set up a temporary camp. Ezekiel placed a target at 75 yards and handed Kiona her Spencer carbine. She loaded 7 rounds, raised the rifle smoothly, and fired 7 times in perhaps 12 seconds. All 7 shots hit the target. My target, 5 of them in the center mass area. O'Malley whistled low. That is better than half my men can do. Where did you learn to shoot like that, lass? Ezekiel taught me, Kiona said simply. 4 days ago, I had never held rifle. Now I can hit what I aim at. 4 days? O'Malley looked at Ezekiel with new respect. You are a hell of a teacher, Mr. Frost. I had motivated students, Ezekiel said. Over the next 2 days, they fortified the cabin and prepared for the next attack they all knew was coming. O'Malley's men helped construct barricades, clear fields of fire, and create fallback positions. They dug a trench around the cabin that would make approaching difficult and provide cover for defenders. They stockpiled ammunition and water and medical supplies. During breaks in the work, Ezekiel continued training the women, focusing now on tactics rather than just marksmanship. How to coordinate fire, how to communicate without words, how to cover each other when moving. They drilled repeatedly until movements became automatic. On the second night after Brennan's departure, as Ezekiel was checking the perimeter before sleep, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Kiona approaching, her shoulders hunched against the night chill. Cannot sleep, he asked. Too much thinking, she said. Too many what-ifs. They walked together in silence for a time, their breath forming clouds in the chill air. She rose on her toes and kissed him softly on the lips. It lasted only a moment, barely contact at all, but Ezekiel felt it through his entire body like lightning. Then she stepped back, smiled slightly, and walked back toward the cabin, leaving him standing alone in the darkness, his heart pounding, his mind reeling. He stood there for a long time trying to process what had just happened. Part of him wanted to run after her, to pull her close, to accept everything she was offering. But another part, the part that remembered Margaret and Emma dying while he was away, the part that had learned that caring meant eventual loss, that part held him frozen. Finally, he forced himself to move, to continue his patrol, to focus on the practical matters of survival. But her words echoed in his mind, and the memory of her lips against his burned like a brand. The next morning, Ezekiel was checking the northern perimeter when he found tracks again. Fresh tracks, less than an hour old, one man, moving carefully, observing from cover. But these were not the tracks of one of Hargrove's cowboys. These were different, professional. The stride was measured, the placement deliberate, someone who knew how to move without being seen. He followed the tracks for a quarter mile before losing them on rocky ground where even his considerable skill could not follow. Whoever had made them was very good, better than anyone Hargrove normally employed, better than anyone except perhaps a professional hunter, Silas Cobb. Silas Cobb, Brennan's warning came back to him. 27 kills, never failed. Ezekiel studied the tracks more carefully. The spacing between steps was too measured. The way they disappeared on hard ground showed professional skill. This was not some hired cowboy. This was someone who killed for a living and was very, very good at it. He scanned the tree line slowly, knowing Cobb could be watching right now through a scope, finger on a trigger. The hair on his neck stood up. Somewhere out there, death was waiting. Patient, professional, inevitable, unless he could find a way to change the game. Ezekiel returned to the cabin and called everyone together, soldiers and women alike. "We have a new problem," he said. "Someone was watching us last night. Someone very skilled. I believe Hargrove has hired a bounty hunter." "Cobb?" O'Malley asked, his face going serious. "That would be my guess." O'Malley cursed in Gaelic. "I have heard stories about that man. He is like a ghost. Comes and goes without sound. Kills from impossible distances. If he is after you, this became much more dangerous." "Then we adapt," Ezekiel said. "We post extra sentries. We vary our routines so he cannot predict patterns. We never go anywhere alone." "For how long?" Ezekiel asked. "Until Archbishop Lamy arrives and validates church protection," Ezekiel said. "Or until Hargrove makes his move. Whichever comes first." "That could be days," Tan pointed out. "Then we stay vigilant 4 days," Ezekiel said. "There is no other option." That night, as Ezekiel lay on his bedroll in the barn, he heard a sound that made his blood freeze. A cough, very soft, very brief, but it had come from directly above him, from the loft where he stored hay. Moving purely on instinct, honed by years of living alone, Ezekiel rolled sideways and came up with his Colt drawn in one smooth motion. Pointed at the darkness of the loft above. "Come down," he said quietly. Slowly, hands where I can see them. For a long moment there was silence. Then a voice spoke from the darkness, calm and entirely unafraid. "You are good," the voice said. "Better than most. I have been in position for 20 minutes. You only noticed me when I coughed. That was deliberate. Wanted to see how fast you reacted." A man emerged from the loft, moving slowly and carefully as instructed. In the dim moonlight filtering through cracks in the barn walls, Ezekiel could see he was dressed entirely in black. 2 revolvers on his hips. A rifle slung across his back. This was a man built for killing, carrying death as casually as other men carried tools. "Silas Cobb," Ezekiel said. It was not a question. The man nodded. "And you are Ezekiel Frost, Union sharpshooter, deserted after Gettysburg, living alone for 12 years, and now protecting 5 Apache women from Silas Hargrove." The bounty hunter's voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle. "Interesting choices you have made." "You here to kill me?" Ezekiel asked, his Colt never wavering. "I was hired to kill all 6 of you," Cobb admitted. $3,000, $500 per person. I took the job because I needed the money. My reputation depends on never refusing work. "Then why are you talking instead of shooting?" Ezekiel asked. "Because I made a mistake," Cobb said. "Something I rarely do. I took the job based on Hargrove's description. 5 savage women who needed to be put down. Property that had run away. Simple work. And now I have spent 2 days watching you. Watching them. Watching how you train them. How you treat them. How they look at you with trust instead of fear. And I realize Hargrove lied to me. They are not property. They are people, fighting for their lives against a man who sees them as things to own." Cobb shifted slightly, and Ezekiel's finger tightened on the trigger, but the bounty hunter made no aggressive move. "I have killed 27 people in my career," Cobb continued. "Some deserved it. Some probably did not. I stopped caring about deserving or not deserving years ago. Money was enough justification. But I will not kill you. I will not kill them. Not for any amount of money. Because if I do, I will have become the thing I have been running from my entire life." He paused. "My wife and daughter died 8 years ago, killed by men who thought they were worthless because they were Mexican. I have been trying to outrun that memory ever since, trying to make it mean something by becoming very good at killing. But killing you would dishonor their memory, would make me exactly like the men who took them from me." "So what happens now?" Ezekiel asked. "Now I ride away," Cobb said. "I will report to Hargrove that the targets are too well defended, that the risk is too high, that I recommend he abandon the contract. He will not listen. He will come himself with all his men, but at least I will not be part of it." The bounty hunter moved toward the barn door, then paused. "One more thing, Frost. When Hargrove comes, and he will come, watch for a man named Jackson, former Confederate soldier. Very good with dynamite. Hargrove will use explosives if he cannot burn you out with fire. Be ready for that." "Why are you telling me this?" Ezekiel asked. "Because you remind me of someone I used to be," Cobb said. "Before I let grief turn me into something empty. Do not make my mistake. Do not let loss define you. Those women in that cabin, they are offering you a second chance at life. Take it. Live." Then he was gone, melting into the darkness like smoke, and Ezekiel was left standing alone in the barn, his gun still drawn, his mind trying to process what had just happened. A professional killer had come for him and left without firing a shot, had warned him instead of killing him. The world was stranger than he had ever imagined. He went to the cabin and knocked the signal. When Kiona opened the door, he said simply, "Cobb was here. He is gone. He will not be coming back." "How do you know?" she asked. "Because he looked into his own darkness and did not like what he saw," Ezekiel said. "Some men can be saved, even the ones who seem lost." Kiona reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Like you," she said softly. "Like me," Ezekiel agreed. 2 days later, as the sun climbed toward noon, and Ezekiel was teaching Niobe how to judge distance for rifle shooting, a rider appeared on the southern horizon. Everyone tensed, reaching for weapons, but O'Malley lowered his rifle after looking through his spyglass. "It is one of mine," he said, "a messenger from the fort." The rider arrived 10 minutes later, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. He saluted O'Malley and handed him a sealed envelope. The sergeant read this message and his face went pale. "What is it?" Ezekiel asked. "It is from Major Brennan," O'Malley said. "Hargrove has been seen moving north with 40 armed men. They are 3 hours away, maybe 4. And he is bringing a mountain howitzer, a small cannon." The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. Ezekiel felt ice form in his stomach. A cannon changed everything. The cabin could not withstand artillery. The fortifications they had built would be meaningless against explosive shells. "We need to evacuate," O'Malley said immediately. "Fall back to Fort Union. This position cannot be defended against artillery." "No," Kiona said. "We stay. We fight." "Lass," O'Malley said as gently as he could manage, "this is not bravery we are discussing. This is mathematics. 40 men and a cannon against 16 of us. The cabin will be destroyed. We will all die." "Then we die," Kiona said, "but we do not run." Ezekiel looked at her fierce eyes and set jaw. Then he looked at her 4 sisters, all of them nodding agreement with their oldest. They had made their choice, and he realized he had made his too. "We stay," he said, "but we adapt our tactics. The cabin is no longer the primary defensive position. We use it as bait, draw them in, then hit them from the high ground." O'Malley looked at him. "You want to abandon the cabin?" "I want to use the cabin as a trap," Ezekiel corrected. "We put enough people inside to make Hargrove think we are all here. Maybe 3 soldiers. Give them clear orders to fall back to the caves when the shelling starts. Meanwhile, the rest of us position on the ridge above. When Hargrove commits his forces to the cabin, we hit him from elevated positions. Catch him in crossfire." "That could work," O'Malley said slowly. "If we position right, if we maintain discipline." His eyes gleamed. "It is the kind of crazy plan that might actually succeed." They spent the next 3 hours preparing. 3 of O'Malley's youngest soldiers volunteered to be the bait, brave men willing to draw fire to save others. They positioned themselves in the cabin with clear orders to evacuate through the back window when shelling began and run for the caves. Meanwhile, Ezekiel positioned everyone else on the ridge overlooking the cabin. Good cover behind rocks, clear fields of fire, multiple escape routes if things went badly. The 5 Apache women were spread among the soldiers, each paired with an experienced fighter who could provide backup and support. Kiona insisted on staying at Ezekiel's side, and he did not argue. They lay side by side behind a large boulder, rifles ready, watching the southern approach. "I am scared," Kiona admitted quietly. "Good," Ezekiel said. "Fear keeps you alert, keeps you alive. It is not the presence of fear that defines courage. It is what you do despite the fear." "When this is over," Kiona said, "if we survive, I want to talk more about what I said 2 nights ago, about what I feel." "When this is over," Ezekiel said, "we will talk about everything. Promise?" "I promise." They settled into waiting, that peculiar purgatory before violence where time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. The sun climbed high, sweat formed despite the cool mountain air, hearts beat steady and fast. And on the southern horizon a dust cloud appeared, growing larger as 40 men and 1 cannon approached to deliver judgment. This was it, the moment when everything would be decided, life or death, freedom or slavery, justice or tyranny. The storm was here, and they would face it together, 6 people and 10 soldiers against 40, armed with nothing but rifles and courage, and the stubborn refusal to surrender what should never be taken. Ezekiel looked at Kiona beside him, at the fierce determination in her gaze, and felt something he had not felt in 12 years. He felt that the world was worth fighting for, that some things justified risk, that love, in whatever form it took, was stronger than fear. "Here they come," O'Malley said quietly from his position 20 yards away. Ezekiel raised his Winchester and sighted down the barrel, his breathing calm, his hand steady. "Let them come," he said, "and let them learn what happens when they mistake mercy for weakness." The battle for the mountain was about to begin. Hargrove's column approached slowly, deliberately. 40 men spread in a wide formation, and in the center, pulled by 4 horses, was the mountain howitzer, a small cannon, but deadly enough to reduce the cabin to splinters. Ezekiel watched through a gap in the rocks as they stopped 200 yards out, just beyond effective rifle range. Smart, Hargrove was being careful. A man rode forward alone. Not Reese this time. Someone older, wearing a colonel's hat. Hargrove himself. Ezekiel Calloway, the voice carried across the distance, amplified somehow. "I know you can hear me. You have taken something that belongs to me. 5 Apache women who are legally my property under territorial law. Return them now, and I will let you live. Refuse, and I will reduce that cabin to ash and bone." Ezekiel did not respond. "Let the man talk." "You have 1 minute," Hargrove continued. "Then we fire." 60 seconds of silence. Then Hargrove raised his hand. The howitzer crew moved with practiced efficiency, loading, aiming at the cabin below. "Now," Hargrove said. The cannon roared, the shell arced through the air and struck the cabin's south wall. The explosion was deafening. Wood and stone erupted outward. Part of the roof collapsed. Fire began immediately. Ezekiel saw the 3 soldiers inside burst from the back window as planned, running hard for the tree line. Hargrove's men fired at them, but the range was too far. All 3 made it to cover. "Burn it," Hargrove ordered. "Burn everything." His men advanced on the cabin, firing into the wreckage. They were committed now, focused entirely on the burning structure below them. "Now," Ezekiel said quietly. 16 rifles opened fire from the ridge above. The first volley caught Hargrove's men completely by surprise. 5 fell in the opening seconds. The rest scattered, trying to find cover, trying to understand where the shots came from. Kiona fired with mechanical precision beside him. "Work the lever. Aim. Fire. Work the lever. Aim. Fire." Tayenne was doing the same from her position. Even young Adsila was hitting targets, her fear transformed into focus. The ambush was devastatingly effective. Caught in the open, unable to use the cannon against targets above and behind them, Hargrove's force took terrible casualties. 15 men down, then 20. The survivors broke, running for their horses. "Fall back!" Hargrove screamed. "Fall back!" The retreat was chaos. Men fleeing in panic, leaving weapons and wounded behind. Within minutes, the valley was empty except for the dead and dying in the burning cabin. O'Malley came up beside Ezekiel. "We did it. By God, we actually did it." "For now," Ezekiel said, watching the dust cloud of Hargrove's retreat. "But he will come again. Men like him always do." Kiona lowered her rifle, her hands trembling now that the action was over. "How many?" she asked quietly. 23 dead or wounded," O'Malley said. "Maybe more." He looked at the burning cabin. "Your home, it was just a building," Ezekiel said. "We are alive. That is what matters." But as he watched 12 years of solitude burn to ash, he felt something unexpected. Not grief, but liberation. That cabin had been his prison as much as his sanctuary. Now it was gone, and he was still here, surrounded by people who had become something more than allies. Kiona reached out and took his hand. "Where will you go?" Ezekiel looked at her 4 sisters, at the 10 soldiers who had fought beside them. "I do not know yet," he admitted. "But wherever it is, I will not be alone." She squeezed his hand. "No, you will not be alone ever again." The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the smoke in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Hargrove was wounded but not beaten. The legal battle was far from over. But tonight they had won, and that was enough.